In Medellín, there are close to 600,000 people between the ages of 14 and 28 whom Colombian law defines as youth. Amongst these people, there are many points of views, ways of understanding, and living the city. Being a young person is a world full of questions without answers, and those questions are like Medellín, a city that is still young and is continually transforming. The concept of youth is a cultural construction. It hasn't always existed such as we understand it now. It is not the same to speak about a rural youth, an indigenous youth, or a young Afro-descendant as it is to speak about a young person in a developed country with access to goods and services, or about another one living in poverty and sickness. A person who was 21 years old in the year 1900 isn't the same as a person of the same age nowadays. And even in the same city, it is not the same being a young person in each of its different territories. To understand a young person that lives in Medellín today, it is important to go in depth into what has happened with other youth groups in diverse contexts. The past historical events have an influence on young people and in the ways they relate to each other. Periods of war, peace, changes, or lack of them forge the basis of the current policies that have an influence on youth. Each event, in turn, is a consequence of the politics of that era. In the mid-20th century, while the world is still recovering from the consequences of the Second World War, Colombia undergoes an ongoing conflict due to the confrontation between the two traditional political parties. At that moment, the emphasis of youth policies in the country is directed at qualified technical training for labor. Between the decades of the 60s and the 70s, society and youth's growing discontent, which is in great measure a response to war, opens the door to manifestations of the counterculture. While the world undergoes strong ideological confrontations, in Colombia, union movements, student movements, and workers' movements are established, and also, in order to weaken these, policies appear which are aimed at controlling youth, its vision of change, and its manifestations. All this in accordance with the tendency imposed by military dictatorships in Latin America. At the same time in the country, there is a rise of public initiatives and institutions which aim at preventing young people from getting involved in the armed conflict or drug abuse, or to prevent teen pregnancies, and likewise to propitiate good use of free time. In the 80s, due to generalized poverty all across the Latin American continent, policies for youth and investment for their implementation are oriented towards poverty reduction, prevention campaigns, and the fight against crime. In Medellín, during the middle of the industrial crisis, drug dealing penetrates deeply into all spheres of social and political life through the use of systematic violence and terrorist methods. This takes place in a period when the country's armed conflict worsens. The all-out war between the drug cartels only aggravates the situation and takes it to unimaginable extremes. The world starts to look at youth as a population that deserves specific attention and points of view in order to correctly understand it and intervene appropriately. New programs monitor and exert pressure on countries so that more direct actions are taken in favor of this population. The decade of the 90s begins with important achievements for democracy and human rights. In 1991, Colombia approves and adopts a new constitution that understands young people as being subject to rights and protection. The participation of youth and of the institutions that attend to them acquire a leading role from then on. And in the following years, there appear in Colombia, Antioquia, and in Medellín regulations which bestow upon the young population new and vital settings. While young people are the population most affected by the conflict that the city is undergoing, the institutionalization around them strengthens. This tendency continues during the first years of the new century. After 9/11, the fight against poverty, hunger, and terrible inequality in the world is moved to the background in terms of mediatic attention, investment of resources, and public opinion. There is a constant appeal to fear, and attention is turned towards the weapons race and terrorism. In Medellín, backed up by regulations, diverse projects and initiatives materialize, which understand a young person to be a factor of development and change. The city creates its own public policy for youth, and in the middle of an optimistic scenario and adequate planning, it pours investment into territories where important projects and processes appear that in dialogue with society are led by government. In the year 2012, Medellín's Secretary for Youth is created. A high-level structure with the sole purpose of articulating public spending, invigorating private investment, and strengthening the community and youth dynamics for the development of young people. The statute that renews the reference framework for public policies on a national level is promoted all across the country and elevates juvenile rights to a constitutional level. There has been considerable advancement in issues of social, cultural, health, and opportunities for young people. But the world, the country, and Medellín still have fundamental challenges to face. Santiago is a 19-year-old young man who, having finished school and after 2 attempts at getting accepted into the university, is still looking for a job that will enable him to become independent and to get a place for him and his girlfriend. It's Saturday. Santiago wakes up at about 9. It is already late for him to go to the rehearsal of the ska band he has with his friends in the library park in the Belén neighborhood. Since he has to get there from Castilla neighborhood by Metro Plus and by Metro, he needs some 30 minutes to get there. There is good news. He was admitted into the Visual Arts program at the Technological Institute of Medellín, and he won a scholarship. On Monday, he will go to the university to find out all about it. These things happen to Santiago because in Medellín, there is a public and private institutionalization that guarantees the availability of resources and services and quickly takes responsibility for the enjoyment of his rights. This is, in real life, the public policy for youth, the way in which a young person enjoys life and develops in the city. For a public policy to truly be public, it must take place every day and transcend different administrations. It must be appropriated and built by society, and it must look to the future. Open, flexible, free, and which continually constructs territories in which all can and want to be present. For Medellín to count on a relevant and renovated public policy for youth in which young people are understood as a motor for development, various lessons from different contexts, times, and places were gathered. The norms and implemented programs were analyzed, and research was done on how young people live today, in accordance with various perspectives and in various places of the city. All this with the aim of measuring both the risks involved and its potential factors. The public policy for youth is a population policy of the vital cycle. What does this mean? Santiago was born in San Luis, Antioquia. When he was 3 years old, his family arrived in Medellín, escaping from rural violence. His mother, who today is over 40 years old, has worked since she was 28 in a restaurant downtown. Santiago learned to read and write in school, and since then he reads the newspaper out loud to his grandmother, who is almost 70 years old, and who has been a member of the neighborhood elderly group for almost 10 years. She especially enjoys the activities that she does with the elderly group at the vegetable garden, planting flowers and plants. Santiago grew up and is now a youth. His mother was also young, as was his grandmother when she arrived in Medellín, being only a few years older than Santiago's mom is now. The young man was once a boy. He was an adolescent, and someday he will become an old man. Each young person is part of a family, which settles down in a territory where there can be a school, some sort of health services, and who can count on there being some means of communication. In each sector, in each neighborhood, on each block, there are diverse realities and complexities, and a lot of challenges to be faced. Challenges that require the actions of everyone if they are to be met. To gather the opinions and the perceptions of all the sectors is vital to the construction and perfectioning of a renovative public policy for youth. Medellín has a great goal: to bring about dialogue between multiple policies and people in a coherent and well-grounded manner that are all related to the universe of the young. It is fundamental in this conversation to come close to the ways of understanding the present and of constructing the future of those who are and will be its most outstanding protagonists, young people. What city do young people have in mind? How well do they know Medellín? That Santiago and many others can move freely in a city in which the inhabitants are interested in others and not only in their own well-being is the main challenge of the public policy for youth. A tool that must invite citizens of all ages to meet, talk, participate, and build together. An instrument that enables one to surpass frontiers, to open territories, and to generate spaces for coming together and real construction, in which present-day youth can have a place and also those to come. All people are, will be, or were young, and everyone can relate to them and have an influence on them. Therefore, everyone is a factor that owes themselves to youth. Today, Medellín struggles between innovation and inequity, and young people are the decisive generation to incline this balance. The youth of today will construct the city of the upcoming 50 years. What do you do? What does he do? What do we do? And what do those boys and those girls do so that Medellín can be a sustainable city and a territory of opportunity? It's a job for all of us to make Medellín a city that is always young. Secretary of Youth, Mayor's Office of Medellín.
Medellín. Todos por la vida.